In the Witch's Tent by Fritz Leiber. The hag bent over the brazier, its upward-seeking gray fumes interwoven with strands of her own downward-dangling, tangling black hair. Its glow showed her face to be as dark, jagged-featured, and dirty as the new-dug root clump of a black apple tree. A half-century of brazier heat and smoke had cured it as black, crinkly, and hard as mingle bacon. Through her splayed nostrils and slack mouth, which showed a few brown teeth like old tree stumps irregularly fencing the gray field of her tongue, she garglingly inhaled and bubblingly expelled the fumes. Such of them as escaped her greedy lungs tortuously found their way to the tent's saggy roof, resting on 7 ribs down-curving from the central pole, and deposited on the ancient raw hide their tiny dole of resin and soot. It is said that such a tent, boiled out after decades or preferably centuries of use, yields a nauseous liquid, which gives a man strange and dangerous visions. Outside the tent's drooping walls radiated the dark, twisty alleys of Ilikving, an overgrown and rudely boisterous town which is the 8th and smallest metropolis of the land of the 8 cities. While overhead there shivered in the chill wind the strange stars of the world of Nuon, which is so like and unlike our own world. Inside the tent, 2 barbarian-clad men watched the crouching witch across the brazier. The big man, who had red blonde hair, stared somber-eyed and intently. The little man, who was dressed all in gray, drooped his eyelids, stifled a yawn, and wrinkled his nose. "I don't know which stinks worse, she or the brazier," he murmured. "Or maybe it's this whole tent, or this alley muck we must sit in. Or perchance her familiar is a skunk. Look, Fafford, if we must consult a sorceress personage, we should have sought out Shilba or Ningobo before ever we sailed north from Lenkmar across the inner sea." "They weren't available," the big man answered in a clipped whisper. "Shh, Grey Mouser, I think she's gone into a trance." "Asleep, you mean?" the little man retorted irreverently. The hag's gargling breath began to sound more like a death rattle. Her eyelids fluttered, showing 2 white lines. Wind stirred the tent's dark wall, or it might be unseen presences fumbling and fingering. The little man was unimpressed. He said, "I don't see why we have to consult anyone. It isn't as if we're going outside Nuon altogether, as we did in our last adventure. We got the papers, the scrap of ramskin parchment, I mean, and we know where we're going, or at least you say you do." "Shh," the big man commanded, then added hoarsely, "Before embarking on any great enterprise, it's customary to consult a warlock or witch." The little man, now whispering likewise, countered with, "Then why couldn't we have consulted a civilized one, any member in a good standing of the Lenkmar Sorcerers Guild? He'd at least have had a comely naked girl or 2 around, to rest your eyes on when they begin to water from scanning his scabbard hieroglyphs and horoscopes. A good earthly witch is more honest than some city rogue tricked out in black cone hat and robe of stars," the big man argued. "Besides, this one is near our icy goal and its influences. You and your townsmen's lusts for luxuries. You'd turn a wizard's workroom into a brothel." "Why not?" the little man wanted to know. "Both species of glamour at once." Then jerking his thumb at the hag, "Earthy, you said? Dungy describes her better." "Shh, Mouser, you'll break her trance." "Trance?" The little man re-inspected the hag. Her mouth had shut, and she was breathing wheezingly through her beaky nose alone, the fume-sooty tip of which sought to meet her jutting chin. There was a faint, high wailing, as of distant wolves or nearby ghosts, or perhaps some such odd overtone of the hag's wheezes. The little man sneered his upper lip and shook his head. His hands shook a little too, but he hid that. "No, she's only stoned out of her skull, I'd say," he commented judiciously. "You shouldn't have given her so much poppy gum." "But that's the entire intent of trance," the big man protested, "to lash stone and otherwise drive the spirit out of the skull and whip it up mystic mountains, so that from their peaks it can spy out the lands of past and future and mayhaps other world." "I wish the mountains ahead of us were merely mystic," the little man muttered. "Look, Fafford, I'm willing to squat here all night. At any rate, for 50 more stinking breaths or 200 bored heartbeats, to pleasure your whim. But has it occurred to you that we're in danger in this tent? And I don't mean solely from spirits. There are other rogues than ourselves in Illichving, some perhaps on the same quest as ours, who dearly love to scupper us. And here in this blind leather hut, we're deer on a skyline, or sitting ducks." Just then the wind came back with its fumblings and fingerings, and in addition a scrabbling that might be that of wind-swayed branch tips or of dead men's long fingernails a-scratch. There were faint growlings and wailings too, and with them stealthy footfalls. Both men thought of the Mauser's last warning. Fafford and he looked toward the tent's night-slitted skin door and loosened their swords in their scabbards. At that instant the hag's noisy breathing stopped, and with it all other sound. Her eyes opened, showing only whites, milky ovals infinitely eerie in the dark root-tangle of her sharp features and stringy hair. The gray tip of her tongue traveled like a large maggot around her lips. The Mauser made to comment, but the outthrust palm side of Fafford's spread-fingered hand was more compelling than any shh. In a voice low but remarkably clear, almost a girl's voice, the hag intoned, "For reasons, sorceress and dim, you travel toward the world's frost rim. Dim." Dim is the key word there, the Mauser thought. Typical witchy say-nothing. She clearly knows naught about us except that we're headed north, which she could get from any gossipy mouth. "You north, 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 and north must go, through dagger ice and powder snow." More of the same, was the Mauser's inward comment. But must she rub it in, even the snow? Brr. "And many a rival, envy-eyed, will dog your steps until you've died." Aha! The inevitable fright thrust, without which no fortune tale is complete. "But after peril's cleansing fire, you'll meet, at last, your heart's desire." And now pat the happy ending. Gods, but the stupidest palm-reading prostitute of Ilfmar could... Something silvery gray flashed across the Mauser's eyes, so close its form was blurred. Without a thought, he ducked back and drew scalpel. The razor-sharp spear blade, driven through the tent's side as if it were paper, stopped inches from Fafford's head and was dragged back. A javelin hurtled out of the hide wall. This Mauser struck aside with his sword. Now a storm of cries rose outside. The burden of some was, "Death to the strangers!" Of others, "Come out, dogs, and be killed!" The Mauser faced the skin door, his gaze darting. Fafford, almost as quick to react as the Mauser, hit on a somewhat irregular solution to their knotty tactical problem, that of men besieged in a fortress whose walls neither protect them nor permit outward viewing. At first step, he leapt to the tent's central pole and with a great heave drew it from the earth. The witch, likewise reacting with good solid sense, threw herself flat on the dirt. "We decamp!" Fafford cried. "Mauser, guard our front and guide me!" And with that he charged toward the door, carrying the whole tent with him. There was a rapid series of little explosions as the somewhat brittle old thongs that tied its rawhide sides to its pegs snapped. The brazier tumbled over, scattering coals. The hag was overpassed. The Mauser, running ahead of Fafford, threw wide the door slit. He had to use scalpel at once to parry a sword thrust out of the dark, but with his other hand he kept the door spread. The opposing swordsman was bowled over, perhaps a bit startled at being attacked by the tent. The Mauser trod on him. He thought he heard ribs snap as Fafford did the same, which seemed a nice if brutal touch. Then he was crying out, "Veer left now, Fafford! Now to the right a little! There's an alley coming up on our left! Be ready to turn sharp into it when I give the word! Now!" And grasping the door's hide edges, the Mauser helped swing the tent as Fafford pivoted. From behind came cries of rage and wonder, also a screeching that sounded like the hag, enraged at the theft of her home. The alley was so narrow that the tent's sides dragged against buildings and fences. At the first sign of a soft spot in the dirt underfoot, Fafford drove the tent pole into it, and they both dashed out of the tent, leaving it blocking the alley. The cries behind them grew suddenly louder as their pursuers turned into the alley, but Fafford and the Mauser did not run off over swiftly. It seemed certain their attackers would spend considerable time scouting and assaulting the empty tent. They loped together through the outskirts of the sleeping city toward their own well-hidden camp outside it. Their nostrils sucked in the chill, bracing air funneling down from the best pass through the Trollstep Mountains, a craggy chain which walled off the land of the 8 cities from the vast plateau of the cold waste to the north. Fafhrd remarked, "It's fortunate the old lady was interrupted just when she was about to tell us something important." The Mauser snorted. She'd already sung her song, the sum of which was 0. "I wonder who those rude fellows were and what were their motives?" Fafhrd asked. "I thought I recognized the voice of that ale-swiller Narfi, who has an aversion of bear meat." "Scoundrels behaving as stupidly as we were," the Mauser answered. "Motives? As soon as impute 'em to sheep. 10 dolts following an idiot leader." "Still, it appears someone doesn't like us," Fafhrd opined. "Was that ever news?" the Grey Mauser retorted.